Hello, everybody. Welcome into our Road to Atlanta live from Marlowe's Tavern, the Brookhaven location. What a night it's already been. And the fun is just getting started right here on video with all of you. Thanks so much for being here. Also, thanks to our huge crowd on hand here as well for what has been a fun night already. Jeff Sintel is here. The former Georgia great John Stinchcomb is here. My name is Brandon Adams. We are all getting ready for the big one on Saturday between the Georgia Bulldogs, the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'll also explain while I'm holding this fantastic bottle of sparkling wine here coming up in just a couple of minutes as well. But John, I think the one sense that I've gotten from being here in the room at Marlowe's in Brookhaven tonight, and from a lot of the Dog Nation folks we've talked to this week, is there's a heavy dose of realism in place here. I think that there is optimism that Georgia can win this game on Saturday, but Georgia is an underdog for a reason. We've called it Underdog Nation Daily this week, appreciating the fact that Georgia gets a chance to shock the world, but there's a reason why Alabama is a favorite, and clearly that sense of realism about just how stiff this challenge is going to be on Saturday, I don't think that's lost on the Georgia fans we have in the room tonight.
No, I think most Georgia fans are realists in the fact that Alabama has earned their way to be the top seed in all of college football. I think what's insulting and the slap in the face is the 2-touchdown line that you see.
Sure.
Georgia is a great football team, and to think that they are 2-touchdown underdogs, knowing how talented they are and the style of football that they're playing right now, there's a reason that you want to be the underdog and have come into a game with a chip on your shoulder when you have the talent to back it up, and I think that's where Georgia stands.
Yeah, I think that John brings a really good point, Jeff, in that if you give me a choice of playing this Alabama team as a 3-point underdog or playing this team as a 13.5-point underdog, whether you got money on the game or not, I do like the extra motivation of telling this Georgia team, one that's won 5 straight games, one that's been a completely different team in the month of November compared to where it was before the bye week and when it lost LSU. Tell this team that's got no chance of winning. Tell this team, and I'm sure that somebody, Scott Sinclair probably, but somebody is telling this team right now, hey, that nobody thinks you got a chance to beat Alabama. I do appreciate the way that Georgia's likely to respond to that situation in that moment.
Yeah, I would say, I talk to young players so much that I would say Georgia's ready for that smoke right now. And that's like, they don't have any smoke or whatever. But, the thing about this one, maybe this is just the moment that's getting to me. But every time in football now, when you see these hyped champion that's up really high and it's so heavily favored, I just have this feels a lot like Patriots, Giants, Super Bowls. This feels like what we said before the audience today. To me, this is probably the best Alabama team they've had.
Yeah.
At least offensively with the combination of the defense. I think Kirby Smart even said that this week. It was one of the very best he's seen. So it's not just Georgia's going in there to knock off an Alabama team. They're going in there to knock off one of the best Alabama teams. And yet, I bet a lot of Georgia fans that are on this feed right now would go, they would think Georgia has a better shot with Bama on Saturday, or maybe just as good a shot as Auburn last year in the SEC championship game, because everybody has that image of how they were trounced in Jordan-Hare, and oh my gosh, is it going to be another one of those things? I think this Georgia football team is going to play very well on Saturday.
And John, to that point, Dallas Schwartz in our Facebook comment section a moment ago said, it's a stiff challenge, but this is a game that Georgia can win. And I completely agree with Dallas on that. And in terms of the way that I've talked about this game this week, that's also been my language as well. I would never be so bold as to sit here and say, I can promise you Georgia's going to win this game. They're going to win it for sure. And here's what the final score is going to be. I'm not ready to go on the record yet about my official pick yet. But in terms of the notion of Georgia can win this game, absolutely can win this game. And it doesn't even need to be some crazy confluence of events for it to happen. Georgia playing its best game against Alabama, who as of late has been at the very least imperfect. I think saying Georgia can win this game is an important place to start the conversation.
No question. And I think more importantly than what we feel about the game, I think the men in that locker room have the utmost confidence that if they play the style ball that they're capable of, that they can win that ball game. And that's more important than what we can talk about leading up to the game. If you go into a game confident, it matters less about the opponent that you face than how you approach the game. I mean, there have been times where when you're not playing well and you're going into a game where you think, this might not fall our way. And the flip side of that is you go into a game where you're the underdog and you kind of like being there not because of who the opponent is, but because how you're playing, and you feel like you can beat anyone in the world, and I feel like that's where Georgia is right now.
James Crump says Georgia's winning this game on Saturday, and I will admit it's nice to see that level of confidence from some Georgia fans. You know, I was saying this to our audience here at the Marlows in Brookhaven before our video broadcast began when we were doing our off-air conversation. We were in this spot exactly a year ago, and Jeff said it. There was a feeling about going into that Auburn game last year of, oh, I don't know about Georgia-Auburn. After all, Auburn had just beaten Georgia in November there in Jordan-Hare Stadium. But I remember holding this bottle of sparkling wine in my hand there at that time and said, you know what, how nice would that be to pop the cork on this thing come Saturday and celebrate a Georgia win? Well, 28-7 over Auburn. That's exactly what we got a chance to do. And to think about the same kind of thing, the celebration of last year's win versus Auburn would pale in comparison to what could happen if Georgia really is popping the corks after beating Alabama on Saturday. Now, speaking of why I have this Michelle Brute sparkling wine in my hand, let me explain this right now. Marlowe's Tavern's got a great holiday gift idea for you, especially if you've got a hard time getting your shopping list taken care of. If you buy a $50 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, now some folks here tonight have already bought one, you can go to your neighborhood Marlowe's Tavern and get that for yourself, or you can go to marlowstavern.com. It's right there on the homepage. You can find the place to sign up to get your $50 Marlowe's Tavern gift card. When you do, Marlowe's got a gift for you. They're going to give you a Michelle Brute sparkling wine. But in addition to that, if you buy a $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, in addition to the Michelle Brute sparkling wine, you also get a bonus $20 gift card. So it's a great holiday gift-giving idea. You can do that at your neighborhood Marlowe's Tavern or online at marlowstavern.com. But Jeff, to hear James Crump and others saying, hey, Georgia is going to win this game, taking it beyond the Georgia can win to the Georgia will win. Listen, I'm not going to be mad at any Georgia fan who wants to have that level of confidence either.
So sometimes when you say very few words, it carries more power. I think that's what those public speaking classes I took.
That's a secret I've never learned, I don't guess.
So
I don't think saying very few words has ever been a description given around for me.
So here's the thing. Alabama is a machine. They're a juggernaut. I think what Tua and his band of merry men do is kind of Houdini stuff. So the way you beat that team, run the ball, pound them, lay on them, efficient strikes, vertical shots downfield. Guess what? That's what Georgia does best. So the way to slay this team right now, I'm not going to call them Goliath. I'm not, because that's David and Goliath thing. These two teams have enough talent, and the talent is similar enough to where this is not a David and Goliath thing whatsoever. But I'm going to say this. The way Georgia plays its best football game, if they're to play its best football game, that's the recipe to counter everything Alabama does great right now. And I think, we wrote this on the site today, I think the way Georgia beats Alabama is they play like Alabama used to before they decided to go five wides and spread in the Tua show. That's by knocking them in the ground, keeping things rolling, and taking their shots, and then getting their chances in play action.
So, John, along those lines, what Jeff said there at the end is really important. Yeah, you want to pound them in the ground, you want to be physical, and you want to open up holes for the running game, but you also have to add that extra dimension. And Jake Fromm, I thought, was very interesting this week. Had a little confidence in his voice when he said, when we see the coverage we want to see, we've got to take our opportunities and take our shots. It's got to be both, right? You can't beat Alabama 17-10. You're going to have to get to 35 or somewhere around that to win this game, which means that you do have to have both elements of what Jeff was just describing, right?
Yes. Georgia has faced games and opponents this season where the defense would load the box, and it did not matter. Georgia could still run the ball effectively despite the fact they had an unblocked defender in the box. Alabama's not that team. So when Alabama comes and shows those looks where they're deterring the offense from running the ball, they're giving you a look that is not run-friendly, you're going to have to be able to execute your pass game. And it sounds like Fromm's ready for that challenge, and he'll need to be, because I'm sure Alabama is going to try to take away your strengths. The strength is that Georgia's going to want to come into the game and exert their will of, we're going to run the ball and then take our shots.
G. Grace in our YouTube comment section, by the way, is an Alabama fan, but was talking about how this week it needs to hurry up and be over with so the game time can be here on Saturday. And, John, as a player, when you're playing, we'll talk more about the 2002 SEC Championship that you played in later on the program, but I'm imagining you don't feel that because you're going to practice every day the way that a fan does. It's only Tuesday, it's only Wednesday, it's only Thursday, it's still 48 hours from game time. For the fans, I have heard from so many people, the Alabama side here apparently, but also the Georgia side of, let's get this week going so this game time can get here. But as a player, I'm guessing you don't quite feel that way because you've got daily preparation that you're taking care of.
Well, you're anxious for that moment. You're ready for it to come. Now, the preparation piece is something, we're all creatures of habit. I mean, we've been trained that on Monday, this is our routine. On Tuesday, this is what we do. And throughout the week, it's a building process for you to be prepared to execute on the weekend. When Saturday comes around, you're as prepared as you possibly be for your opponent. And that's no different. I mean, fans are ready to play as soon as you get done with the last game. As a player, you go through your routine of getting your body right mentally, focusing on what the different challenges are you're going to face in the game, and there's a process to that, and you can't just make it happen overnight.
Jeff, can I change the subject just for a second? Because Myra Herbert Bush in our Facebook comment section brought up something kind of interesting, that this game potentially has playoff implications for certainly the winner, but potentially the loser as well. Myra coming to this from the standpoint of it'd be a shame to see Alabama stay in the 4 rounds to Georgia Savage. Listen, I like that line of thinking as it is, but what do you make of this in terms of, you know, Alabama's potential of getting in the playoff, even if Georgia wins? That'd be 2 years in a row Alabama makes the Final Four without having won the SEC. But also this chance of probably needing some help. But Georgia, if it can give Alabama the fight of its life and come up just a little bit short, assuming that Oklahoma doesn't look good against Texas, that's probably the main thing. But I guess you'd also factor in Ohio State versus Northwestern a bit too. What do you make of the possibility that this game, with either outcome, could still produce 2 playoff teams from the SEC?
So here's what this is my theory. It's not if the playoff will expand, it's when the playoff will expand. Because I think what's going to happen is it's Oklahoma, it's Ohio State this year. Ohio State for the second year in a row is going to be seething mad that they're not in this game. So, you know, what I see is it the best 4 teams, which is what it's supposed to be. When they're in that room, we're supposed to simplify it. Who are the best 4 teams that advance to the second season? And if Alabama wants to lose, their one loss would be to the number 4 team in the country. Georgia would move up, of course, so it'd be a top 4 team. And then Georgia, they would have a loss as well. But then what if that's a great duel with Alabama again? Isn't that harder than facing Northwestern? Isn't that harder than facing nobody? Isn't that harder than facing Texas? I mean, I think Clay Travis, of all people, made the point today. Everybody has their own opinions about Clay Travis. But he said Georgia has more wins. And I looked at Georgia has more wins against top 25 teams than both Ohio State and especially more games against Power 5 teams with winning records than both Ohio State and Oklahoma put together. Now, if you're looking at that resume and you're wanting to get that team in the final dance, and lo and behold, what if Georgia does another overtime loss, a nail-biter, or what if they bounce Alabama? Those 2 teams that are playing right now, I think, is the de facto national championship game.
What do you think of that, John, the idea that both these SEC teams could still be in the college football playoff?
Well, I think if Georgia wins, that's an easy answer. I think more of the question comes is if Alabama wins, and it's one of those nail-biters, knockdown, drag-outs that goes to the end. Now, I don't see it happening that way. I'm a Georgia loyalist, and I bleed red and black. But there's no way in my mind that committee can, at the end of the day, despite the fact there's a strong argument that Georgia would be one of the 4 best teams in the country, for them to stay in front of or jump Oklahoma and Ohio State.
A couple comments I want to get to. Janet Walker in our YouTube comment section a moment ago said, "Man, I wish I was at Marlowe's Tavern tonight. I'm up here in the North Carolina mountains, and it's cold and raining." Well, Janet, we wish you were with us down here in Atlanta area as well at the Brookhaven location of Marlowe's Tavern tonight. But if you can't be with us here in person, we're thankful to have you where you are watching on the Dog Nation video channels right now. And by the way, for all of you who are tuning in right now, thanks for being a part of what we're calling our Road to Atlanta Live from Marlowe's Tavern at Brookhaven. That's Jeff Sintel. That's the great former Georgia offensive lineman John Stinchcomb. My name is Brandon Adams. Thanks so much for being with us. You may, if you're just tuning in, wonder why I've got the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. This is a part of a great promotion that Marlowe's Tavern's running right now. $50 gift card when you buy one at either your neighborhood Marlowe's Tavern or at marlowestavern.com. A gift to you just for doing that is this bottle of Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. Also, when you get the $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card, they're going to give you a bonus $20 gift card, which is a cool thing in itself. You can keep that for yourself. They're also going to give you the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. My advice there, keep that, pop the cork on Saturday. We'll all celebrate, spraying, pouring, whatever they do in the locker room when Georgia gets that win against Alabama. Alan Singleton also in our Facebook comment section a moment ago said, and apparently Alan must be an Alabama fan, said, Alabama skunked the team that beat up Georgia. And I don't think there's anybody here at this table who's going to deny Georgia did not play well against LSU. But, John, you and I were talking about this before the show, and I feel like I was saying this the entire time, and so I don't think this is, just saying this in hindsight. We always knew that Georgia was going to have to get better over the course of the season because of the young players that's playing. That's not excuse making, because you can actually look and see the way that Georgia has grown. Because neutral site against Florida, the number 9 team in the country right now, Georgia wins that game by 19 points. Blowout on the road against Kentucky, the number 15 team in the country. Number 12 offense, according to Football Outsiders, Georgia Tech. Georgia shuts them down, certainly until garbage time on Saturday. We have clearly seen improvement since the game against LSU. And, listen, a lot of teams have had, good seasons, meet premature issues in Baton Rouge. But I'm not going to hold what happened in Baton Rouge to this Georgia team right now.
How many times have you heard that argument, and how many times can you look in history and prove that it doesn't matter? I mean, there's something that you can gain from seeing opponents in common. But, I mean, yes, Georgia lost to LSU, and yes, Alabama dominated LSU in their game. But how that correlates to what happens on Saturday, I think, is minimized by who these teams are and how they match up.
I mean, Jeff, you know how big of a Georgia fan I am, but I've told you a million times on and off the air, I wouldn't have wanted to play Alabama in September. And early October, when Georgia got beat up by LSU, I wouldn't have wanted to play Alabama then either. And I think any even objective observer would say Georgia wasn't ready for this game the first 6 weeks of the season and was not ready to go play in Baton Rouge then. But go back to Death Valley now, that's probably a very different game. In Atlanta against Alabama, we'll truly get a chance to see how much Georgia's grown. But this is a Georgia team that was always going to be about being better in November than it was in September and October, and I think we've seen examples of that on both sides of the ball.
What's interesting, and it's about whatever team's playing better on Saturday. That's really what it's about. And Georgia has the youth movement with all those guys. Jordan Davis, I'm sure you've seen how much of a difference he is in terms of soaking up blocks in the middle. Let's do a fun little game. Let's take the last 6 games that Georgia has played, and let's take the last 6 games that Alabama has played. How do you feel about that matchup then? The way these teams have played down the stretch, can you make the argument that Georgia's playing just as well as Alabama is right now? I probably can.
Yeah, if you look at, and listen, I know this is just, fodder for conjecture, but Alabama does not score 30 points against the best 2 defenses it's played over the last 5 games. Failed to score 30 against LSU. Failed to score 30 against Mississippi State. Now, they shut both those teams out. I won't deny that. But neither of those teams right now are terrific offensively. We saw Alabama get exposed a little bit to Auburn with its defense in the first half. Auburn moved the football, and I think had some of those Alabama linebackers kind of off balance a bit in that game. I'm not telling you that adds up to a recipe for how Georgia's going to win this game. But as Jeff said, if you watch the last 5 weeks, there's reason to feel hopeful about what you've seen from Georgia and reason to be at least a little bit doubtful. I mean, even Brad Nessler talked about that on our program, Underdog Nation Daily, this morning, that you have seen some examples of Alabama playing not quite as well lately when it's played against better opponents.
I think you can create a certain mystique around your team that they're untouchable. And that's what we seem to get with Alabama. Alabama is a great team. Nobody questions that. But they're not untouchable. I mean, there are teams, other teams that can beat Alabama. I just so believe that Georgia's one of them.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you can play sub-excellent football and beat them? No, of course not. Georgia's got to play really well on both sides of the ball, put together a complete game. But Alabama is a beatable team. They're just great.
Yeah, the one other thing is, look, Tua and those receivers, and I'll be very honest, I'm trying to be very objective here. I think Alabama has 3 to 4 receivers better than anybody Georgia has. That's how good they are. But I think the overwhelming strength of the throw game in Tua, it covers up a little bit of warts for Alabama. If you look at Alabama, I talked to a guy this week that knows Alabama backwards and forwards, and he tells me they have a little bit of flux on their offensive line just like Georgia does. Who's their left guard? What's going on right there? And then you look at their secondary. My job is to cover recruiting. Georgia had to rebuild its secondary last season for this year. Alabama had to do the same thing. Multiple jobs are up for the freshmen in this class. They're just as young as Georgia is on the secondary, except Georgia's got DeAndre Baker, a first-round pick. They've got J.R. Reed, a future NFL player that's a veteran that's been in these games before. I can make the argument that Georgia's secondary looks better than the Alabama secondary, and I want to see more talk about how can Alabama's defensive backs cover Georgia's receivers, because I think that'll be a big part of that game.
Will Scott, our YouTube comment section, says, BA, what's more likely, that Rodrigo Blankenship completes a pass or that the Alabama guy makes a field goal? And, John, I will tell you that when I look at that ultimate vulnerability for Alabama, there's no denying it's that. They've missed 5 of the 18 field goals they've attempted this season. I mean they, because they've had 2 different kickers. 8 extra points, had a punt blocked against Auburn. Now, Kirby Smart will come right back and say, but look how good their kick coverage teams are, and look how good their returners are. That's fine. Statistically, they're okay. They're not quite as good as Kirby thinks, or at least lets on as. But missing kicks, I hate to come down to that, but you know what? I'll take every point I can get or any point I can keep off the board for Alabama. The commenter's not wrong. That's a big storyline.
The only time that matters is when games are close. Alabama hasn't been in a lot of close games, so it covers up the fact that their special teams at times have been a big flaw. Warts, Achilles heel. Well, if you're in a big game, which you should be from here on out, the rest of the calendar year, those start to really matter, and there's no doubt that Rodrigo gives you a huge edge anytime you take the field in special teams.
That is John Stinchcomb. That's Jeff Sintel. I'm Brandon Adams. Thanks for being a part of Road to Atlanta Live from the Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven. I know with Jeff here, many of you I'm seeing in the comment section as well. You want to talk a little bit of recruiting. Before we're done, we'll let Jeff give us a little bit of an update on that. We'll also hear more of your comments about what you think happens between Georgia and Alabama. But, John, while we've got you here, and you did such a great job of telling this story on, as we're calling it this week, Underdog Nation Daily this week, about being a part of that first Georgia team to play in the SEC championship game. And I told you, the Georgia Dome as a building is a little bit different than Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Mercedes-Benz Stadium's got the big ring video board. It looks almost like a spaceship, but you felt the big stage, and you experienced what it was like to play in a game that was even bigger than the other big rivalry games you played all season long. Georgia's back here again after having been here last year. But for a lot of these freshman players, they'll be doing this for the first time. What is it like when you go from regular season game to postseason game? What does it feel like? Firsthand.
Well, you feel the atmosphere. You feel the fans. You feel the fact that this game is special. And those are the similarities. You're playing for a conference championship. You're going to represent the SEC. It's a huge game, and you know that everybody's watching because it's the best conference in college sports. Those are the similarities. The differences were in 2002, Georgia hadn't been there in 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, we hadn't been there since Herschel Walker was trucking
That's
folks.
Right.
And, we were trying to reestablish Georgia on we're competing for championships every year foray, and hadn't been there. This team, they played in Notre Dame in a big game in that type setting. They played in the Rose Bowl. They played in the SEC championship. Only the true freshmen haven't experienced being in the atmosphere of a national championship. So that feeling should be one of familiarity for them.
How do you think the message gets passed from veteran to younger player, Jeff, in terms of, hey, go in this spot, be comfortable, don't be intimidated by the crimson and white on the other side, don't be intimidated by the stadium? How does that message get communicated?
I just think the Georgia program is just built on competition. And listen, we can dance all these things around, but Georgia has faced an opponent every day in practice that's pretty close to Alabama.
That's a good point.
And that's their football team. They're used to
several Georgia players, by the way, have said that themselves this week, too.
I love the Elijah Holyfield comment this week when somebody's like, is there any intimidation factor with Alabama? And Elijah Holyfield looked at that guy and asked that question like, do you got any chicken wings here left at Marlowe's?
Right, yeah.
And he's like, bro, come on.
Right,
what?
yeah.
I mean, all these guys have been recruited by the same staffs. They know each other very well. There's not a wide gap in talent between these two teams at all. I think the fact that Georgia's been here, the bulk of their roster has been here. Jake Fromm has performed in that sort of arena before. I mean, and listen, it is a different scheme. Don't get me wrong. Different scheme. But stopping Alabama and their throw game will be tough. But I don't know if the degree of difficulty will be any tougher than it was Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma last year.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy could do whatever he wanted to.
Different offense, but for the most part, same result.
It's the guy that could sit there and get to his third and fourth read and make his projection, make his read. and then he can sit there and put the ball on somebody wherever he wanted to.
John, before we get ready to wrap up, you mentioned the fact that when you guys won the SEC championship in 2002, it was the first time Georgia had won that title since 1982, in an era before the SEC championship game. I got to ask, because I'm a little bit older than you, so I'm very much in the wheelhouse of enjoying that experience. I remember how hard it was to find tickets to that 2002 SEC championship game. I know many people are struggling with the same thing right now. But I also can remember the fact that, I'm not really old enough to have remembered Herschel Walker. Like, I've heard the stories. I saw him play, but I wasn't old enough to know what was going on. So I lived my entire life into my 20s having never seen Georgia win an SEC championship. And there are several 100,000 people who experienced that the same way that I did. What did it feel like to give us that thing that we had wanted for legitimately 2 decades? I mean, that's got to be a special memory even now, knowing that you contributed to, a big part of Georgia's history.
Without a doubt, and I think it's an expression of gratitude from the fan base of Georgia fans expect to be playing for national championships every year, even if realistically in the back of our minds we know that's probably not going to happen. But when you start, for the first time in 20 years, my generation, we've seen highlights of Herschel and Buck Ballou and Lindsey Scott, but we didn't watch every week that they played their games. So 20 years is a long period of time, and the Dog Nation was very grateful. And it's like, finally, we're back to where we think we should be.
So, Brandon, forgive me. I'm going to be a reporter here for just 1 second. All right. John, you've played a lot of football in your life. Where does the SEC championship euphoria, walking around that field, where does that rate in your ball playing days? Where does that rate for you?
Collegiate experience, it's pretty close to the top. I mean, it didn't turn out into that tight game. We ended up kind of blowing the brakes off Arkansas that game and went to the Sugar Bowl and beat Florida State and Anquan Bolden, and felt like we were one of the best teams, if not the best team in the country at the right time. You talk about building momentum, and we had that unfortunate loss to Florida, which we don't even want to talk about.
But I bet that Florida loss focused the team, and everybody got a little mad and went about their business the rest of the way, right?
Yes, and we had to go into Auburn and kind of recover a game, but it was because we had great leadership in the locker room, and we were able to focus on our our targets at hand.
How about Chad Goldenberg in our Facebook comment section, who said, I was able to attend live all 3 of the Sugar Bowls that Herschel Walker played in. Chad, that's a pretty nice cachet to be able to say right here. We appreciate you being part of our Facebook comment section here tonight. Before we wrap up, Jeff, as we head towards National Signing Day, we'll get this SEC championship game kind of right here in that process. A lot of coaches doing in-home visits this week. Kirby Smart says the kind of guys they're going after like the fact that Georgia's not doing as many of those because, let's face it, Georgia's going after the best players. Being one of the best teams is certainly a nice selling point there in that regard. Give me an idea of how this game impacts recruiting for the good in terms of the big stage, for the bad in terms of extra attention with in-home visits right now that Georgia's not necessarily a part of, and kind of where things are is we're really about, less than 3 weeks from the early signing period start date.
Yeah, so I think what the recruits look at is they sit there and they go, Georgia was not just a one-year wonder with Roquan and Sony and Nick Chubb last year. They see Georgia winning the SEC. They see Georgia playing in the Rose Bowl. They see Georgia playing for the national championship last year. Now look at this season. See them back in the SEC championship game again. They're playing Alabama. And, hey, Alabama's not recruiting on the road again this week either. So that's the competition for a lot of these guys. They're not out there on the road either. So I think a lot of folks sit there and they look at this game and they go, wow, this Georgia team's got staying power now. This program has got staying power there. Kirby Smart spoke this week about he wanted the program to be relevant now, wanted it to be important. Georgia is at that stage. And, I guess I'm a little animated tonight because, hey, I'm not saying Georgia's going to win the game. I don't think there's 13 points, 14 points difference between these two teams. And I think the athletes on Georgia's side will be challenged by all this. They will be playing in their home state, and they want to go out and make amends for the way that last year ended. Georgia, one of the things we put on the forum today is I put in a little quick note about, everybody talks about it's not the same Georgia team. Roquan, Sony, Nick Chubb, Isaiah Wynn. And we made this point in front of the audience. Alabama had 11 guys drafted off their national championship team.
That's a good point.
Georgia only had 6. Alabama had 4 first-rounders drafted off that team. So if you want to say about the Bulldogs that are not in this fight on Saturday, there's a lot of Crimson Tide dudes that aren't there either.
Yeah, John, final thought from you, if you don't mind. I think we're all on the same page here that I don't know that any of us is going to go on record and say, I'm guaranteeing a Georgia victory, and I'm going to walk from here to Athens if they don't. I don't know that anyone's making the guarantee on the victory, at least at this table right now at the Marlows in Brookhaven. But in terms of Georgia having a legitimate chance to win this game, I can certainly look at you and listen to you tonight. I know that you believe that's possible.
There's no question. No question. It just based on, I'm a loyalist. I'm a Georgia guy. I'm biased, but watch the tape. Watch the way these teams are playing and judge for yourself from an unbiased perspective. And you have to believe that the way Georgia is playing football right now and the way Alabama has shown some vulnerabilities, that this game could very easily become more competitive than most people are predicting.
Jeff, how about a final thought from you?
I think if the Bulldogs play like Alabama's dynasty was built, run game, play action, great defense, wear down an opponent, play keep away with that ball, that's the recipe for a lot of great football upsets throughout championships at any level, pro, college, what have you. And you know what? That's the best way Georgia plays football, so that's why I think they have a chance on Saturday.
Quick final thought from me. First of all, Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven, always incredible hosts for us. They always make us feel so at home. And if you want to, we've got some coming up for you in the weeks ahead. We'd love for you to be a part of. But also check out the Marlowe's Tavern that might be there in your neighborhood. I think you'll find they treat you just as well as they always treat us. And don't forget, go to marlowstavern.com or the tavern there in your neighborhood to get your Marlowe's Tavern gift card. A $50 gift card purchase get you as a free gift the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. And with the $100 Marlowe's Tavern gift card purchase, they'll also give you a bonus $20 gift card, and they'll give you the Michelle Brute Sparkling Wine. And it's going to be a great way to come celebrate on Saturday night. You know, I don't know how often I've actually done this in life where you pop the cork and have it go everywhere, but I wouldn't mind doing that. A little spray, a little pour. You know, you see the guys do that after the World Series, the Super Bowl. Maybe some dog fans get a chance to do that around their tailgate come Saturday night. Either way, we've got a lot more coverage on our road to Atlanta over the course of the next couple of days. Our friends from Marlowe's, by the way, going to be with us as part of our Road to Atlanta tailgate on Saturday at the Blue Lot. That's going to be a lot of fun. We'd love to have you come by and see us there at 11 a.m. Also, as we're calling it this week, Underdog Nation Daily Live tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Another look at the game between the Dogs and the Crimson Tide, and then we'll have our Road to Atlanta special driven by Cadillac as well tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. from downtown Atlanta as we inch closer to the game on Saturday between the Dogs and the Crimson Tide. We're excited here. We love hearing about your excitement in our comment section. We'll see you tomorrow morning for Underdog Nation Daily. And then throughout the weekend, as Georgia heads on down that road to Atlanta. But for tonight, for John Stinchcomb and Jeff Sentell, I'm Brandon Adams saying good night here from the Marlowe's Tavern in Brookhaven.